Hello, this is the talk on firearms etiquette and gun laws in New Hampshire. We have a pretty small group here, so kind of do this interactive. If you have questions at any point, just get up and ask, but please go to the mic just so it's caught on the recording. So my name's Tony Lekas. I'm an NRA training counselor, which means I'm a firearms instructor and I train people to be firearms instructors, and I ran the training program at a club for over 10 years and trained most of the instructors for it. And there's a great group in New Hampshire called the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire that provide women-only training, and a lot of them I trained to become instructors, and now they're off handling it on their own, which is great. Also, I'm in my third term as a New Hampshire state representative. So, a little bit of history. Early on in PorcFest, it wasn't as common. There were fewer states where you could carry either open or concealed unless you were a special person or something. And so people would come here. We weren't constitutional carry at that time, but open carry was legal without any paperwork. And so there was a certain amount of freedom. I can carry a gun, and you bring one or you borrow one from somebody, and people had them in holsters that maybe didn't fit, and they didn't really know what they're doing. Somebody'd say, "Oh, what's that handgun you have there?" And they'd pull it out in the middle of a crowd to show it around. And so we were concerned that something tragic would happen. And porcupines aren't good about giving them commands. So we wanted to do it as firearms etiquette. And the idea is that if you're carrying a firearm, you're to some extent especially if it's open, you're an ambassador for the gun-owning community. And the point was to be safe and obviously be safe and to be polite. And which is just, for a handgun, you keep it in the holster, have a safe way of carrying it that'll retain the firearm, cover the trigger. And I haven't seen people with long guns yet this year, but if you're going to do that, keep an empty chamber flag in just so that people can see it's not loaded, because in an environment like this, it's almost impossible not to muzzle somebody, because you lean over, they're at a higher point in the slope than you are. If it's pointed up, pointed down, there's legs, kids, animals, and everything. So it's just obviously being safe and to help make people comfortable. And I had a number of experiences where I had to talk either very drunk or very high people into letting me keep their firearms overnight so that nothing bad would happen, and that got a little tense sometimes. So the other part is just plan ahead. If you're going to imbibe whatever, leave the firearm someplace and while you're doing that, because your judgment might be impaired. Anyway, that's really it for the etiquette part, unless somebody's got questions. Is there anybody here who's not familiar with firearms? Doesn't have them, hasn't shot, anything like that? And the other question is, who here is not currently living in New Hampshire? Okay. So I'll go over the basic rules. It's always keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction, which means don't point it at anything you're not willing to kill and destroy. And the key is think about how you're going to handle the firearm, where it's going to be pointing while you manipulate it. Once you have experience, it should become pretty automatic, but especially for people that are new to it, it's important. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. You've decided to shoot. And that's because, you stumble, you get startled, you start to fall. It's common to involuntarily your muscles to tense up, and if your finger's on the trigger, you could fire it when you didn't intend to. And then really know your target, what you're going to shoot at, and what's beyond it. And as long as people follow the rules, then everything should be okay. And the key is not to get careless. Everybody's going to, unless somebody here is perfect, is going to violate one of the rules at some point if you handle firearms much. But the key is to care about it, to notice it and go, oh, whatever, and I got to be more careful. It's when you get careless and you make mistakes and you don't correct the problem that mistakes can pile up and eventually you can have a tragedy. And that's part of the reason, there's more than one rule. People make mistakes, but you want to have to make multiple mistakes at the same time before something tragic happens. So unless there's questions, that's it for firearms etiquette and firearm safety. So then I was going to talk about the current state of gun laws in New Hampshire and what's been going on in the State House with regard to that. And New Hampshire is actually, I don't know the laws in all other states, but we're, if not the best, one of the better states as far as gun laws. There is no such thing as an illegal firearm as far as state law goes in New Hampshire, and that includes full auto. The only state laws on full auto are the felon in possession, like any firearm. If you're, a prohibited person, you can't have it, and you're not. And the other one's a fish and game law. You're not allowed to hunt with a machine gun, although you can hunt with a suppressor, just not a machine gun. And that's it. Now, the federal laws, on all that is a more complicated situation. But if you go through the federal loopholes, then there's no problem having, if you want to walk down Main Street with an MP5 over your shoulder, you're going to get some questions, but it's legal. The other thing is, as far as New Hampshire law goes, there is one and only one place in the state where you're not permitted to carry a firearm, concealed or open, and that's past the security checkpoint in a courthouse. That's it. Any public building, parks, we have state preemption, so no local jurisdiction can pass any law on firearms, ammunition, firearms components, knives, any of that. And there's also no such thing as an illegal knife in New Hampshire. So that's good. We also have, in effect, federal nullification, although it's a little weaker than it could be. But basically, employees of the state of New Hampshire and all political subdivisions are not permitted to spend any resources, including their time, enforcing any federal gun law, rule, or executive order unless the same action is illegal under New Hampshire state law. Now, we got it out of the House like that, and the Senate added something to it where there's some special, if you're part of some task force thing, then, there's an exception, which I think, it has, I don't know that it's actually caused any problems, but I would rather it wasn't there, but that's how it is. As far as as far as where you can carry, there's federal law. So, you don't carry into federal buildings, and that includes, courthouses, Social Security office, and in theory, post offices, although I don't know quite what the status is there, and I haven't heard of anybody being prosecuted for it, but I would advise to stay out of post offices if you're carrying, just to be safe. What's that? Okay, actually, can you come to the mic? Because they're recording this and they won't get it otherwise.
What about federal state parks?
Yeah, in the national forest you can carry, my understanding, first of all, I'm not a lawyer. I've listened to a lot of lawyers go over this, but so take it with a grain of salt. But my understanding in national parks, as opposed to forests, you can carry in the park as long as you have a license to carry valid in the state where the park is, but you're not permitted to carry in park buildings, even with a license to carry. And I've tried to actually get an answer to, does that include the pit toilets? And I haven't gotten an answer on that. But again, it hasn't been a problem, but but that's the situation on that. State parks are fine. Your town parks, everything. It's perfectly legal. The other thing is, if a business, a privately owned business, posts no weapons or something like that, that does not have the force of law. So it's not a criminal offense to carry anyway. But if they notice you're carrying and they ask you to leave, you need to leave politely and promptly, or you can be charged with criminal trespass. Because, if they don't want you there, it's their property, you should go. And you'll have some places like, there may be some entertainment venue, big for concerts, where they may actually check people going in. There are a few situations like that. But it used to be more businesses would post, and then one of the gun rights groups in the state, people would let them know, and they would send a letter to the business on their official letterhead letting them know that they were going to post, that business, list them on their website as a business that their members might not want to, give their business to. And we actually got a number of businesses to take the signs down. over stuff like that. So, and there's still some out there. You know, medical facilities generally do, unfortunately, but which I think is, you know, the whole creating a victim disarmament zone is not a good idea. Now, if I'm going to go to the doctor and they're going to give me anesthesia, I'm going to be incompetent. I'm not bringing my firearm in. So, you know, regardless whether there's signs there or not. So that's the situation. We used to have a problem in some of the cities, and it still could happen, like Manchester, where they'd see somebody carrying it, even though it was perfectly legal, they'd give them a bunch of grief about it. And this is going back quite a few years. You know, the FSP had picked New Hampshire, but it was earlier days. And there were some problems with that, and so a group of people put together open carry trash pickup. So you had a bunch of people, obviously open carrying, going around cleaning up trash in the parks, you know, around the police station. And then went in and had a meeting with the police chief. And actually, that did change how they handled it and got a very positive article in the Union Leader, which is the big state, you know, newspaper. So there's been some activism like that, which is kind of, you know, loosen up that kind of problem. I'm not saying there's no problems, you'll never get grief. And if the other thing is where you can shoot. So I know there's some states that have public ranges. As far as I know, that concept doesn't exist in New Hampshire. So most people, either you shoot on your property or if it's legal, and I'll get into that, a friend's property. A lot of people belong to what are called, you know, fish and game clubs that typically have ranges. And then there's some places out, you know, where people will shoot. Oh, sorry about that. I won't make that stop. And, you know, to the extent that's legal or not depends on where it is. It's kind of local knowledge in the town, you know, where you can go shooting if there is someplace like that. In the more populated areas, there tend not to be anymore. But like, you know, I'm a member of Londonderry Fish and Game. We've got a bunch of ranges, including a 400, 200, and 100, a couple of 50s and all that. But if you have some land, you can shoot, as long as you're the owner, you have the owner's permission. You have to be, where you're shooting from has to be 300 feet from any permanently occupied dwelling unless you're the owner or you have the owner's written consent. You have to be 75 feet from a road. You're not supposed to shoot over a road. And that's about it. The bullets have to stay on your property. And then you can shoot. And that's actually probably where most people shoot, unless they live in the, you know, more densely populated areas. And the only exception is there's these urban compact areas where you can't, I mean, you know, self-defense you can, but you can't go like do target practice or something. But those areas, generally, there's little or few, if any, places that meet the other requirements because it's more densely populated. So it doesn't tend to pose a problem. So that's the situation on where you can shoot, where you can carry. Schools, there's no law, nothing in New Hampshire state law that says you can't carry in a school. But there's a federal law. You know, people think, oh, no guns in schools. Well, actually, there's an exception in that law if you have a license to carry valid in the state where the school is. And so I'll get into constitutional carry and all that. We have an optional license to carry. One of the reasons I keep it up, even though I don't have to, is because I end up, state rep, I end up going to the schools for meetings or other things. And that, or, you know, some friends' grandkids have a music concert or play often in the schools, and that way I don't have to worry about it since I carry all the time. If you are up here with, you know, carrying firearms, you have to be very careful that you do not go down into Massachusetts because, you know, that's another, I mean, I'll talk about that later if people would like to know, but, you know, unless you got a Massachusetts license to carry, and I can get into what's involved in that, you know, if you go down there and they decide to prosecute you, which to some extent they, after the Brown decision, they have, people from New Hampshire that get caught down there with firearms, they've tended not to prosecute, and there's actually been some cases where at least in the lower courts they got it thrown out. But it's not in a settled state, and so I wouldn't want to be, you know, the test case unless you're planning on it and you got lawyers lined up and all of that. Because if they do prosecute you, you know, it's a mandatory, I forget, it's like 3 to 5 years in state prison, no time off for good behavior, no parole, mandatory minimum, no discretion of the judge. So, and that's for firearm or ammunition, or technically ammunition component. So in theory, an MT-22 case will get you, but I've never heard them doing that, but in theory. So that's the situation. Vermont is still constitutional carry, although they've put in some restrictions on high-capacity magazines and some other things. I haven't looked at the details there. Maine's actually pretty good, and they're basically constitutional carry if you're at least 21. If you're 18 to 21, you have to have a license to carry, or one they recognize, which they do recognize, the New Hampshire one. So, and of course, you can't go into Canada with firearms. So those are our bordering jurisdictions. And I think that's pretty much it for carrying. And purchase and possession. So, you know, if you're going to buy from a gun shop, you have to go through the same NICS check, like, you know, it's a federal law. You can do private sale, but first of all, especially for handguns, both the buyer and the seller must both be officially residents of New Hampshire. If not, that's federal. If not, you're both committing a federal felony, okay? So if your friend comes over from Vermont or Mass or something, and you want to sell them a handgun or buy one from them, you can't do that under federal law. New Hampshire doesn't care, but. And if you're buying and selling between two people who are residents of New Hampshire, you can buy from anybody, no paperwork, cash, whatever. If you're going to sell to somebody, there is a thing in the law that says it should be someone personally known to you. That is not defined in the law, and there's been zero case law because nobody's ever been prosecuted under it. But it's like you should, you know, be reasonably, you should kind of know that they're not a convicted felon or, you know, something like, you know, one of the prohibitions, restraining order, or domestic violence offense, some other things, the federal things. Or you can ask to see their New Hampshire, we call the license to carry a pistol and revolver license. So, I mean, I bought things, you know, somebody puts it up on a cork board at the range, and I don't know the person at all, and I want to sell something to them. You know, in that case, I've asked to see their license and take a picture of it, because that covers me. If they go out and commit a crime with it, I've at least done my due diligence to, you know, they're not. If the police say they can carry a concealed firearm, then, you know, I can sell it to them. So, but again, nobody's been prosecuted under that one. And as I said, there's no such thing as gun registration or prohibited guns or magazines or accessories or any of that. So you can buy, you know, you can own a Browning M2 50 caliber machine gun if you go through the federal paperwork, the state, and you got the money. The state doesn't care. Just don't hunt Bambi with it. And, okay, so that's purchase, possession. There is a law, there's not really a safe storage law. There is a law, it's just ridiculous. It says that if somebody, it's either under 16, I think, gets a hold of your firearm and causes harm with it, then you're guilty of a Class B misdemeanor, except there's all kinds of exceptions. So if they committed a crime, like they broke in your house to get it, it doesn't count. If they've had firearms training, so if they've taken like NRA basic pistol or the Boy Scouts firearms training or 4-H or whatever, then they've been trained. They're presumed to know what to do and what not to do, and you're not on the hook. So it's basically meaningless. I mean, you should keep your firearms out of unauthorized hands anywhere, both to avoid harm and because you'd probably rather nobody walks off with them. But that's it on that sort of thing. So, use of a firearm for self-defense. We don't use those words, but basically we have castle doctrine. I mean, there's no duty to retreat. If you're outside, away from your home, it's a thing you should retreat if you can do so in complete safety. But that's meaningless because there is no such thing as complete safety. Nobody's been prosecuted under it. When we tried to get the law, we got the law changed, and we tried to drop that part out of it. And, you know, it's the usual BS. You know, I think it was Mayor of Nash. Some of the local city officials were going on about how you know, the gangbangers can now go shoot each other and it's perfectly fine and they can't be prosecuted, which is, you know, utterly BS. That was not the case, but, you know, people spread enough fear, uncertainty, and doubt that that part wasn't taken out. But we were wanting to take it out mainly because it is meaningless. It just caused confusion. So basically, there's no duty to retreat. And it's kind of the standard thing. If you reasonably believe you're in imminent danger of grave bodily injury, or death, and grave bodily injury or death, automatically forcible sex offense, arson or attempted arson of an occupied dwelling, kidnapping or attempted kidnapping all count explicitly. So you can stop that kind of stuff. And we can get into some technicalities, which I'm not going to do here, but the basic rule of thumb is you do not use deadly force to defend property, okay? If you do that in New Hampshire, you're probably, unless you can reasonably argue that you were personally threatened as part of it, and so you're really defending yourself, you're going to be in big trouble. So it's not Texas, which I don't know their law, but I've heard that you can do that there, but not here. But I mean, if you need to defend yourself, defend yourself. But my advice is, try and avoid having to use your firearm if at all possible, because it's going to cause trouble, and it's not going to be a fun thing unless you're a sociopath. And the firearm shouldn't get involved until you really have to use it. It's just my take on it. And how that sort of thing is handled is dependent on the local police and the local prosecutors. Also, there has been a problem with people charged with reckless conduct, with conduct that really wasn't. So we did actually get the law changed to explicitly say that if you use the firearm to stop an altercation where you probably were justified in shooting somebody, but you didn't have to, then that was legal. It used to be ambiguous. You had some prosecutors, in cases like that, where you would have been better off if you shot the person legally. We did not want that situation. So the situation is not perfect, but it's pretty good. If you're here and you want to shoot on your property, my advice is go around and talk to your neighbors and let them know you're going to do it. I mean, they can't say you can't. But a friend of mine bought like 30 acres and had a house on it, and he went around and talked to the neighbors, but some of them weren't home, and I was up there with them. We're shooting off the back porch, and cops showed up. I mean, somebody called, 911, shots fired. The cops have to come out and check it out. And so he said, yeah, we got a call about shooting. Yeah, we're shooting off the back deck. We told him. He looked and said, all right, we'll let him know it's fine. And then we ended up shooting the shit with him about firearms for a while before he went to talk to him. But it's, the culture is a little different in different parts of the state, but if you're, sensible with your firearms and don't do something stupid or reckless, you should be okay. So we've got sales, possession, self-defense. Any questions on any of that? Gun laws in New Hampshire. If you're bringing firearms, let's say you're moving here from, I don't know, anywhere. You're unless you're coming from one of the New England states, you're going to have to drive among other places, New York, because New York runs from the Canadian border to the ocean. And so how do you get your firearms here? And one is, there is the federal law, the Firearm Owner Protection Act, and the firearms have to be unloaded and inaccessible to the driver, which means if you got a trunk, they should be there. If it's an SUV with no trunk, I would lock them up somehow and then put them like in the back and the luggage on top of them. And you really don't want to avoid having interaction with the police if you can, because while you're in the right legally, there are states where they don't care, and until you get a lawyer to get you to shut them down, you can have a problem. New Jersey's been pretty bad about that. But the law, and you have to take a reasonably direct route in space and time. So you can't stop and visit a friend for a couple of days or something like that. You can take reasonable stops for food, fuel, and rest. And then you can drive, no matter what the laws are of the places you're going through, federal preemption says you can transport your firearms. But you can't carry them on yourself. They can't be loaded or anything like that. So that's how you get them here. And again, you can bring anything. It doesn't matter. No such thing as an illegal firearm. So, again, any questions? And then in that case, I'll talk about what's been going on in the legislature for the last lot of years. I was involved with Pro-2A groups going up and lobbying the legislature, and then in 2018, my wife and I got elected as state reps, and we've been state reps since then. And something going on over there? What's that? Oh, canopy blew over, okay. So New Hampshire's kind of funny. It's basically, I guess, a purple state in a lot of ways. And control of the legislature has gone back and forth. At the moment, the House is just about tied. The Senate is 14-10 Republican, although some of them aren't great Republicans, but they are on the firearms issue, they are. And we also have a small number, but enough of the Democrats who support gun rights that, there's always attempts, bills are always put in to do various things, and I've gotten up on the floor and argued against bills for waiting periods and prohibit firearms in schools, and then we've had attempts at red flag laws, and we had one this year about reporting more information on mental health stuff to the NICS, the National Instant Check System, which was actually pushed by a Republican, unfortunately. And we've managed to stop them all, either kill them in the legislature or in 2019 and 20, when the Dems had a big majority in both the House and the Senate, we had the governor, and he vetoed all any gun control bills, and we were able to sustain the vetoes. So it's I think one of the truest things that's ever been said about government and politics is I think it was Jefferson, I could be wrong, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. It's, you can win battles, but it's like you're never going to win the war. It's a fight that always has to go on. So if you're here in New Hampshire, you move here, there's several gun rights groups that are active in the state, join and get involved, and they'll usually send out alerts if there's a bad bill. And it does really make a difference if a ton of people contact, reps on the committee and their reps, or, show up for a public hearing is even better, to oppose them, and that can really make a difference. For the people that don't know how the New Hampshire legislature works, the House has 400 members. And so there's one state rep for every 3,444 people in the state. So in theory, it should be somebody, in your town who you may very well know or whatever. And so, you can talk to your local rep or reps, there's multi-member districts, and let them know what your views are on things. Either in general, if you come, or, if there's a particular bill you have an issue on. Every bill gets at least one public hearing, and if it's before it passes, it has to have a minimum of two, one in the House, one in the Senate. And anybody can show up and testify on any bill. I guess in some states, if you want to testify before the House committee, you've actually got to get an invitation or something. But here, anybody can show up. And I will say that if there's a bill coming through and you manage to fill the committee room, the hallway, and the stairs with people opposing it, that has a real impact. And that has happened when there's been particularly bad bills proposed. So, please, if you're here or you're going to come here and you care about this issue, please get involved. Join one of the groups. You'll be notified, if there are bills coming up, mostly to oppose. There's a few things I guess we could do to make the situation better, but it's limited. So mainly it's fighting anti-gun bills and to keep things the way they are. But we need everybody to do that. And as I say, as a rep, to a large extent, the amount of power and influence I have as a rep is determined by the number of people behind me and how outspoken they are, how involved. Right? So that's important. But yeah, it's an ongoing battle, and it will continue to be, I'm sure. I mean, the fear is if, the voters in their infinite wisdom give a majority of the House and the Senate, which they've done in the past, and we end up with a Democrat governor. That would be a catastrophe because then they could pass whatever they want and get it signed, maybe. But we've had Democrat governors who have opposed gun bills because they know that, if they sign them, then they're going to have a real problem the next election. It's not just Republicans or libertarians in the state that support the right to have firearms, although, it's a minority of the other party, but there are some there who are good on the issue. So, and that's it. I mean, for firearms in the legislature, there may be a few things could be done to, I don't know. The problem is how do you pass a law to tell a prosecutor to act sensibly? I mean, if somebody goes and threatens somebody else with a firearm without a good reason to do it, something should be done about that. That's wrong. That's an app violation. It's a crime. It should be. But I had a situation where I was called in I was acted as an expert witness, where some guy had a .22 and they're firing CCI shot shell at squirrels chewing on the eaves of their barn. And the neighbors, who I think they moved up from Mass, they didn't know anything. They called 911, shots fired, fine. Police should have come out and asked what was going on, looked at it, and went and told the neighbors it was perfectly safe. But they didn't. So they charged this guy with reckless conduct because, he's shooting up in the air and there's a road in that direction. Yeah, there's a road in that direction. It's about 300 yards away. And, CCI, if you don't know what that stuff is, it's like little metal flakes. It's basically called rat shot. And it's not going to go very far. And then the first prosecutor was an idiot and didn't know anything about firearms and decided he was going to pursue the prosecution. So the lawyer the guy got was somebody who's a friend of mine, and he asked me to do. So what I did is I went to the range and got some of that stuff and thin paper targets at different distances. And I documented the whole thing, measured everything, wrote up a report, had my CV in there and all that. And then he took that back, and at that point, a new prosecutor had been assigned, presented this to the prosecutor. It was this lady who actually was familiar with firearms, and she said, oh, it was shot shells? All right, I'll just dismiss it. This is ridiculous. But that guy had to spend, I don't know how much he paid the lawyer. The guy's not cheap, and I got, $250 to do that. If I had to go to court and testify, it would have been more. I charged to put a suit on, but except as a state rep. But no, this guy's a truck driver, so he got screwed over by the system, basically. So that kind of thing does happen. But the challenge is how to write a bill that it says, tells the prosecutors, don't act like an idiot. I did try and get bills through to deal with qualified immunities, so you could sue government officials who violate your rights. But that was, it's a long and terrible story, and it was unsuccessful. So, other than that, I don't know what you can do. But in general, the New Hampshire gun laws are actually close to as good as you can get. There are problems elsewhere in the system. So again, we got plenty of time. Any questions on anything related to guns, not the State House, how the New Hampshire legislature works, whatever? Yep, come on up. And we've got about 25 minutes,
So my dad is getting up there in age. He has a bunch of rifles. He lives in New York. How do you transfer, on his death, how do you transfer those guns over? They're all really old, 40,
here's
50.
the deal. I don't know New Hampshire law. New York law. But as far as New Hampshire and the feds are concerned, and I would actually suggest if you can do it, if he'll go along with it, do it before he dies. To basically make sure they're unloaded, locked up in your trunk, and just bring them to New Hampshire. Okay. I don't know New York law, but if you're taking them out of the state, I don't know if you have to tell them anything. You'd have to check with a lawyer down there who knew New York law. But you can drive it up here, protected by the federal law. And once you get to New Hampshire doesn't care, as long as you're not a prohibited person. So you're not. You're not a federal felon, dishonorably discharged from the military, adjudicated mentally ill, domestic violence conviction, restraining order. That's kind of it, I think, that kind of thing. But as long as that's not the case, then you don't have to tell anybody in the state. We don't care. So, anything else? Questions? Nothing. All right. I guess we'll cut it short. Thanks. And I'll be around. If people have questions, just grab me.
Tony, kind of on that same topic, are you
Sure.
familiar with the concept of firearm trusts, where the trust owns the
I am.
firearms?
Actually, maybe you could do, that's actually not a bad idea. You can create a trust, and you can transfer the firearms to the trust, and then you can have a number of people who are, and thanks for bringing that up, a number of people who are members of the trust. This is particularly important if you own any Class 3 firearms, federal, things that are covered by the National Firearms Act of '34, which are full auto, suppressors, short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, and a few other specialty things. And especially for suppressors, since more people own suppressors. I mean, unfortunately, I bought 2 suppressors a long time ago before I was aware of these things. But that way, there's a number of advantages, especially for things like suppressors or full auto. I mean, I bought these things. My wife's also a firearms instructor and knows how to shoot, but she can't take the suppressors on her own to the range because they're in my name. Whereas if we had a trust and she was on it as well, then she could. Plus, you can will it. You can say who's going to inherit it. But that's true for firearms in general, not just Class 3 stuff. So that's the other option. And thank you again. You need to talk to somebody who knows how to set one up. There's lawyers that deal with trusts and whatever. And if you have your father, with you, set one up, and then transfer ownership of the firearms to the trust, and you're named on the trust, then when he passes away, they don't have to go through probate. The reason I said do it before he dies, if he's okay with it, is once they get into probate, it's going to get more complicated. And the state gets involved and all that. But as he said, if you put it in a trust, then you can avoid that. But I would still say, even if you do that, if you can, move the firearms while he's still alive, because the whole thing, it's not a question then. And he can say, I mean, he probably doesn't have to, but sign something that he's giving them to you. Might be a good idea in case there are questions, and then just bring them up here. So, questions again. All right.
What age do you recommend? I have 3 kids, 10 and under.
Yeah. How old are they?
Early, 10 and under.
Okay.
We bought our oldest a 22 for her 10th birthday, and she took a marksmanship class and uses it pretty often. But with the younger ones, I'm just kind of curious if there's a recommended age or a...
It depends. So I'll tell you what I've done. I mean, I've had students. I taught a lot of basic pistol, basic rifle, and personal protection classes. And for the basic rifle and pistol, I've had students as young as 6 take an actual class. My suggestion, and what I did with our kids and grandkids, is, when they were really little, we could have toy guns around, but what I did was, if the game involves, your brother or sister's a monster or a bad guy and shooting them is part of the game, then that's fine. But otherwise, you don't go waving the gun around, right? And so for them, they're little kids. The safe direction was down, which I know it's not always down, but that's what I did with them. And I taught them the finger off the trigger. So you got this little kid walking around with their finger off the trigger and the gun pointed down, and then they go and shoot their sibling. And that's fine. And so you're teaching them some basic, muzzle control and the finger discipline. And then, I think the parent needs to make an assessment of the kid's physical and mental maturity. Because different kids at different ages are both physically going to be able to control a firearm. And, the best thing to start with is there's a cricket rifle, or I've got makes a Henry Mini Bolt 22, which I have. They're short, small, light rifles. And you get, to begin with, you got to stay right on top of them. You're not going to hand them a rifle to go at 6. But what I did is, once I thought the kids were old enough that could do this, would be to take them shooting from time to time. One thing you got to watch out for is, when you shoot, lead gets on stuff, and as long as you practice reasonable hygiene, it's fine. But it is a heavy metal neurotoxin, and younger kids are more susceptible than adults. And a lot of younger kids, their hygiene habits tend to be horrible. So you got to keep an eye on them. No fingers in the mouth and that kind of thing, but until you wash really well. And then at home, if one of them expressed an interest, I want to see the guns. You don't want them to be the forbidden fruit. So if we weren't busy, if they wanted to handle a firearm at home, that's fine. I'd get it out. Keep it locked up. I'd get it out. And they would have to tell me the rules of firearm safety before they could touch the firearm, and we'd have to discuss what was the safe direction. There's going to be no ammo, but still, it doesn't matter. And they'd have to tell me what they thought was a safe direction and why, and then, I'd let them handle the firearm, dry fire it, and whatever, and then we'd put it away. So that, so it wasn't something they were going to sneak around to get, because they could handle it more or less when they wanted to. And went to the range. And then as they got older, I went with them to the range, and they were operating a little more independently. They might be the next shooting station over. I kind of keep an eye on them, but I knew they weren't going to do something crazy. And then you get into the kids have a thing where if you got a semi-auto, you go bang, 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 you shoot all the bullets down there, and you're not very accurate. And what I found is had like a pallet on Ed down there. I put a golf ball on it, and it was a Lever Henry 22, and I handed him initially like 7 cartridges, and if he didn't shoot the golf ball off, this is like 25 yards. If he didn't knock the golf ball off in that, I would take it and shoot it off in one shot, which kind of, for the kid I was dealing with, that was a challenge. And so once he could get it reliably with that number of cartridges, then I started handing him 4, and then 3, and 2, and and so he had the incentive to just be more accurate. And if I saw a pattern of problems, then I'd correct the problem, but otherwise, and that, I found that was pretty effective. But again, it's going to depend on the kid. Even for adults, you teach adults. Different people are different. They got different issues or whatever. But really, there's no set age. But I've taken kids as young as 6. But again, that age, hygiene, man, they're terrible. Or if you get an air rifle, it's less of an issue. But especially if air rifle, you could do it, in your yard or in the basement. If even an air rifle at the range, though, everything's going to be covered with lead, basically, at a range where people are shooting regular firearms, and so hygiene's still an issue. So, questions? Come on. Don't make us end too early. Oh, this character, you're going to cause trouble, I know.
This is a softball.
All right.
So over the past year or so, especially, we've seen gun control being pushed by both Democrats and Republicans within the state legislature. So I guess the question would be, what preventative measures can we take within the state legislature to make sure gun rights remain protected in the state? And, for example, a Second Amendment Protection Act. And if that's your answer, what's kind of the general history on the Second Amendment fight and the Second Amendment Protection Act fight?
What do you mean by the Second Amendment Protection Act?
Yeah, so that would, I've seen this being implemented in states across the country where essentially there are preemptive efforts to make sure that gun control measures aren't put into the state legislature, right? So you would have to, it would be a preventative measure towards maybe red flag laws or preventing extended waiting periods.
I don't know what the mechanism other states have used. I don't see one possible in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Because any rep or senator can put in any bill at any time, and there's nothing you can do to limit it short of a constitutional amendment. And we already have a very strong Second Amendment, entry. It's better than the federal one in the state constitution. You have a right to use arms in defense of yourself. It actually says your property, your family, and the state. And so that's there already, and so it's a matter of, unfortunately, the legislature passes laws that violate the Constitution all the time,
Yeah.
and the courts may or may not be good as to whether or not, they declare it invalid because it's unconstitutional. But there's no way to bind, other than a constitutional amendment, to bind a future legislature in New Hampshire. So we could talk separately about the details on how other states have done it.
Right.
Offhand, I don't know of a mechanism to do that in New Hampshire. But to answer your question, the thing to do is, pay attention to who's running in your district for representative and for, state representative and state senator. And, while they're running, get in touch with them and let them know your views on issues that you care a lot about. And in particular, tell them, ask them. And in New Hampshire, generally, there's going to be an opportunity to physically go up to the rep or the rep candidate and talk to them. If nothing else, you go knock on their door, okay, or call them up or send them an email, and ask them point blank, what's your position on the Second Amendment? And if they start waffling and stuff, then they're probably not so good, and they might want to look at other candidates. And even if they say they're good, they say thank you. You should say thank you, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on how you vote on this because this is very important to me. So you put them on notice. And if you are part of a group and you get notice that there's a bill coming up, either before a committee or vote for the full House or the Senate, contact them right away. Now, usually those groups, I would think, contact your legislators. It'll send kind of a form email, which is useful. But there's nothing that says, especially if it's something you think's significant, call them up, send them a letter, send them a separate email. If you want to, knock on their frickin' door. I'm serious. And tell them that, supporting this, I would consider completely unacceptable. And I could never vote for somebody who did that. And I would get my friends and family not to vote for somebody who did that. And that actually, especially a deal where you've got 400 reps and it's a small district, and you have, if you get your friends and family, or, like-minded friends and family, some family you don't always pick, but to get them also to contact their legislators for bills like that. And to people who can do it, because, it's going to be during the day, during the workday if you work a regular job, show up for the public hearing. Because having a bunch of people show up for a public hearing in opposition to a bill, it really does make an impact. No guarantees, but, this is going way back before the FSP, some Democratic senator on the Seacoast put in a bill to basically have Massachusetts gun control up here. And this ended up being like a big reunion because we had around 400 people show up for the public hearing, which they held in Reps Hall. And, there's people there I'd shot with in matches and I hadn't seen in years, we got together, have a good time, we all got up and testified. And normally they'll have a public hearing and then they'll go, often a couple weeks later, we'll then have the exec session where the members of the committee discuss it and then they vote out a recommendation. Now, that one, they closed the public hearing, they opened the exec session, they voted to recommend inexpedient to legislate on the bill, and they closed the exec session, and they were done. I mean, it still had to go to the floor and get a vote, but I think it went on the consent calendar. I mean, the bill is just like dead because they had 400 or 500 people show up against it. It's like, obviously, we're not going to vote for this. So, I mean, it's work, and you have to, you'll never win the war. The war will, unless the culture changes massively, the war will never be over. But I think if people stick together, pay attention, are active, we can stop this stuff. But if we ever have a situation where we got a Democratic House and Senate and governor, it is going to have to take a big effort and a lot of people turning out to convince them that it would be a very bad idea to pass it. And even then, something like a red flag law would be hard to kill. But with enough people, activity, I think you could.
Last question, one more question.
Yep.
What, in your opinion, can be done at the state level when it comes to, disincentivizing or punishing collaboration between federal law enforcement and state law enforcement, especially as it relates to warrants for gun rights or for taking of guns?
Well, we already did.
Supremacy clause, so there's some issues there.
I mean, I don't know when you came in here, but as I said earlier, we do have basically state nullification, where employees of the state and all political subdivision, that includes police, law enforcement, are not permitted to use any resources, including their own time, to enforce federal gun laws, rules, or executive orders unless that same offense is an offense already under New Hampshire law. Now, if we have a good majority, and now the Senate, as I said before, did put in some weaseling carve out for certain kind of task forces and whatever. So that would, if we get a strong, good Republican majority in the House and the Senate and a reasonable governor, then, removing that actually would be a useful thing to try and do, to make it, unambiguous, unconditional, that, they can't do that. And what that would mean is that, as an example, one of many things, New Hampshire, no employee of the state or the political subdivision, no government employee in the state of New Hampshire would be permitted to enforce any federal law related to full auto firearms, suppressors, so-called assault weapons, or any of that, because none of that's illegal under state law, right? And so they'd have to come and do it themselves, which they could try and make an example of somebody, but they don't have the resources to really enforce those kind of laws without state and local help. So it's the same thing like states that legalize cannabis. Part of those laws all say that their law enforcement or employees can't enforce the federal cannabis laws. It's the same thing. We've done it for firearms as well. So, okay. Questions? I'm open for questions. Another 9 minutes. Catch me afterwards. Come up to the mic. Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, because I got to stop before the end. 5 minutes. So, anything else? We got 5 minutes. Come on up. Don't be shy. If not, going once, going twice. Are you coming up for something?
Just thank you and
All right.
moving on. So can everyone say thank you to Tony for that speech?